This is the fourth video in the Fluent Validation series, and in it we're actually going to install the Fluent Validation library and use it to validate some of those string fields in our simple loan system test application. And one thing you'll notice is that Dobby is back on his shelf, so you don't have to worry about his screechy little voice in this video, for which I'm sure some of you will be quite grateful. So here we are in our customer class inside of our loan system library. And we've got this method for adding a customer, which accepts this customer DTO. And this is the point at which we're going to work on implementing some of these validations. So before we use the Fluent Validation library, let's just imagine, like, could we write some C# code that would just validate this? So how about this? If string.is null or empty, customer.ssn, then throw new exception, SSN is required. So I think that should do it. Let's build that. Okay, and then let's run it without the debugger, and let's see what happens. We're going to add a customer. We'll leave the SSN blank. We'll give the person a name, and we run into our exception. So you'll notice this is much nicer than letting it go all the way down through to SQL and having those SQL constraint messages come up. So that's really good. So this would work. You could implement all of your validations this way. It's just very wordy, and it requires a lot of boilerplate code, and it's kind of laborious. So this is where Fluent Validations comes in. It just provides us a lovely, elegant way of implementing this kind of logic. So the first thing we need to do is go to Tools, NuGet Package Manager, and we're going to manage our packages for this solution. And let's browse for Fluent Validations. That's the library we want, and we want to install it here. We'll accept that. And now it is installed. And then where we want to use it here, we need to say using Fluent Validation. So setting up validations manually in this way, as I'm going to show you, is a three-step process. First, we have to declare a validator class, and that's where the rules live. And then we have to instantiate the validator, and then we have to cause the validator to validate. So the first step in that is creating our validator class. So we'll say public class customer DTO validator. And this is going to descend from the abstract validator type, which is a generic class that takes the type of the kind of thing you want to validate. And then we begin a constructor. So public customer DTO validator. It's a parameterless constructor. And inside this constructor is where we define our rules. And here's the magic syntax. I've got some examples on my other screen, which is why I'm looking over there. I just want to make sure I type it right. So we'll say rule for, and then this takes a little predicate expression. So we can just say obj or cust, whatever you want. And what we're going to say is obj.ssn dot not empty. Why did that not work? Because I'm missing a paren right there. Okay, so here's our predicate, which is going to feed the object social security number down the pipeline, and it's going to call this not empty method. So that should do the trick. This is how you construct a validator. Let's write a few more rules here while we're at it. So we'll say rule for obj. And for this object, we want the object.name. And we're going to say object.name is not empty. And we'll say maximum length 100. So this is where it gets really lovely, because we can start chaining these rules together. So now we've validated a few of our rules. Let's build it. Oh no, it's not going to work yet. We have 3 steps. My bad. I mean, we can go ahead and build and make sure we don't have any problems yet, but I know we don't. So the next thing we need to do is, here in our customer class, let's instantiate one of these. So we'll say private static customer DTO validator, and we'll just call it the validator, equals new customer DTO validator. So that's one way we could do it. But really, we want to type this as I validator of our customer DTO class. This is the better way to describe it. We want an I validator, and that makes it a little more flexible and easy to use. So now we can use our validator, step 3. So here we simply do validator dot, and let's call validate and throw, and we'll pass it to the customer. So again, 3 steps. Declare your validator and implement the rules in the constructor. Instantiate a validator that you can use and reuse, which is why it's static. We don't have to make a new one for every call. And then in the calls where you need it, go ahead and validate it. So we'll discuss this a little more, but let's go ahead and just run this. So we're going to say build, and then let's debug this and start without debugging. So 1 to add a customer. Let's leave the SSN blank, and we'll give this person a name. And we get a different validation. Validation failed. Social Security number must not be empty. Severity, error. Wonderful. So let's try again, and let's give this person this. That'll work, but for their name, we can leave the name blank, and we get a similar validation. Name must not be empty. And let's do one more. And now we're going to give it a very long name. And you may recall that under SQL, with just the SQL check constraint and columns, this actually succeeded, but it's silently truncated. Well, now we say unable to add customer, validation failed. The length of name must be 100 characters or fewer. You entered 195 characters. So that gave us a lot more information. And I can do F, I can do 4 to exit the CLI. So that is the basic pattern for using Fluent validations. Now over here, I have a website up, which is the Fluent validation built-in validators documentation. And you can see there's a lot of them. We've used a couple of them, not empty and max length. And in the next videos, we are going to look at a few more of these, not all of them, but we're just going to explore and see all the amazing things you can do with Fluent validations. But that's the basic technique for writing your validations. And one thing I think you can see is that this is very elegant. It separates the validation logic from the logic in your class where you're actually running some SQL or doing some updates. And because it's encapsulated in this class, it makes it very portable. So let's say we had an add method or an edit method, multiple ones that needed to apply the same rules. Well, instead of copying a ton of code, you just copy this one line and validate wherever you need it. Okay, in the next video, we'll take it further and look at some of those other rules.